Hello and welcome to The Menu, Monocle Radio's food and drink programme. I'm your host, Chiara Rimella. Coming up on this week's show, one of London's most storied restaurateurs, Margot Henderson, joins us in the studio to tell us about a feast she has in the works.
Sometimes people can't afford to go to restaurants. Here they can afford a little bite of all these amazing things. And I like the way you just walk around and you try a bit of this restaurant and try a bit of that. And it's very accessible. And also they all come together and it's a bit of a party.
We talk to the founder of a company elevating canned wine.
I had a lot of great wines, and sometimes it's a fine wine moment, but sometimes it isn't. And so sort of like, why isn't there something that's organic, that tastes good, that isn't poisoning people or the planet? And I just felt like if nobody else was going to do that, I was in a position where I could give it a try.
And we speak to a man setting new standards for Greek olive oil. All that here in The Menu on Monocle Radio. Born in New Zealand, Margot Henderson moved to London aged 20 and made her name in the 1990s working as a chef at some of the city's most defining dining spots. In 1992, Henderson opened a dining room at the French House in Soho with her husband and fellow chef Fergus. Today, she's the co-patron of Rochelle Canteen in Shoreditch and leads the caterers Arnold and Henderson alongside Melanie Arnold. This weekend, Henderson is helping to run Soho Food Feast in support of Soho Parish Primary School. She joined us in the studio to discuss the event and the changing face of London's dining scene.
Well, Soho Food Feast is very dear to my heart. It started 12 years ago, I'm pretty sure. I get all those things wrong. I used to live in Covent Garden. I've hung out in Soho for many years. My children went to Soho Parish Primary School. I just find it one of the most vibrant, great areas, exciting areas of London. But one of the reasons why we love it is because of the mixture of people live there, people work there, we come in and out, and it's very vibrant. And I think what we love about, communities when we go to Europe, we love it that people live and work in central areas. And we have to be careful that we don't lose all that and, rising real estate and things. But I feel we go into these areas and we take, and sometimes it's time to give back a bit. And Soho Parish Primary School is a very sweet, beautiful, small school. It's like a country school in a way. There used to be hundreds of schools in that area. And, as people move out, as the area changes, as the real estate want more and more money, obviously it's a very much a changing place. And I was leaning out my window one day thinking, how can I help Soho Parish? And I thought of this idea of getting the restaurant people together. And generally, restaurant people are very giving. They work hard and then they work harder and give. So it's a great community to be with. And started asking them. And, it's always been very successful. And now it runs for 2 days. That's also to help with all the overheads because it's expensive to run. And we make a decent amount of money for the school. So it's great.
Absolutely. I think Soho is interesting because there are other cities around Europe where that isn't necessarily true, that a central neighbourhood still has an appeal, a sense of restaurants, businesses and people genuinely wanting to be there. I think it's quite remarkable that compared to other central neighbourhoods in London and beyond, there is genuinely a sense that restaurants do want to open there, that places with soul still open. It's not just chains, it's not just places there to turn a quick buck, but it is genuinely a hotbed for new concepts as well. Why do you think that is in Soho compared to other places? And I suppose, what's your screenshot or what's your picture of where Soho is at right now from a culinary point of view?
I think Soho is really exciting and there is a lot happening there, and just restaurants like Kiln, the new Brat Mountain, which they're bringing incredible energy. I mean, Yasmin, which is one of the restaurants that's supporting this event, is some of the most delicious Turkish food you can get anywhere. So these places are great, but sometimes Old Compton Street actually can look a bit dull. Do we need another restaurant that's black tables, black that? But this is to do with terrible price of real estate and what the landlords want for it is very difficult. We've lost fish shops, we've lost butcher shops. We have lost a lot of the vitality of Soho. And if we lose any more, it will be very boring. But, central London is such an exciting area to walk in, which is great. I mean, also you have to be careful if you take all the cars out, you just have a sort of mall, which is sort of happening. Chinatown, I mean, we're afraid for Chinatown in a way. I mean, that would be very sad if, we lose the vibrancy of that. And what is Leicester Square now? Leicester Square is basically M&M shop and hordes of people. So, there is a lot that isn't good, but still there is a dynamic and exciting group of people who are, and I think food is one of those things that keep the culture going, and galleries, of course, and fashion and things. But, it's exciting that Marc Jacobs, I think, is in Regent Street, because if we're not careful, Regent Street used to have lots of different shops. Do we just need trainer shops? I think we need a lot of different things to be going on. I mean, the death of the newspaper shop is a very sad part, I think, of areas. So we want to have varied rents, varied things, so that we have proper communities in these areas.
What about bringing these restaurants more into a festival context? What is the creative draw for restaurants to put themselves through the experience of cooking in a different way that is not in the comfort of their own kitchen, but in this much more kind of community-facing way? Is there something for them to be gained, aside from collecting the money? Is there something to be gained from a creative point of view also in doing this?
Yeah, it's creative anyway to give. To give is always an exciting thing, and to give your time, to give your energy is a really beautiful thing. You feel good from that. But also, I think it's a lovely way to show your wares. Sometimes people can't afford to go to restaurants. Here they can afford a little bite of all these wonderful chefs and amazing things. So, I like the way you just walk around and you try a bit of this restaurant and try a bit of that. And, you can have Neil from the French house, you can have this, you can have that. And it's very accessible. And also, they all come together and it's a bit of a party. It's a good day out. Or 2 days, Saturday and Sunday.
Are you genuinely all friends? Is there a feeling of real community in the London restaurant scene? And do you think that is important in a city? Yeah,
I love all my restaurant friends. I love hanging out with them. I love talking shop. It's annoying when a chef goes and you know them or something like that. That's always frustrating. But, there is it's a big city and it can take it. And restaurants are doing well at the moment and we're busy. We could do with more chefs, as always. And, Brexit hasn't helped with that. But I feel there's a lot going on in London with so much exciting food. I'm obsessed with restaurants and love eating in them. And not just my own, but going out, enjoying the whole pleasure of it. I get sort of addictions on one restaurant and I can't stop thinking about it. And then I have to go and then it calms down a bit. But I think there's a real community. People are doing guest chef events in all sorts of places. Somewhere like Quo Vadis, they have a really great guest chef events on all the time. And that gives stepping stones for young chefs or people who are doing new restaurants to show their wares. I suppose that's Soho Food Feast is a place where people can show what they're doing if they've just started out. Or we've got a lot of people who've been doing it for 12 years. The Groucho Club have been there for a long time. Flatiron have been coming. Caravel, I think this is their third year. And the guys, Finn and Lorcan Spiteri, they went to Soho Parish. So did my children. So they're all there giving a bit of a hand. It's exciting.
Well, speaking of this sense of community, I was interviewing some other London restaurateurs the other day who told me that they modelled, or at least they hoped that their restaurant would become like Rochelle Canteen in that they wanted for it to be a place where people met. And because by name and by design, Rochelle Canteen does feel like a place where you can all converge together come lunchtime. The restaurant has shaped the London scene so much. But now that it's not in its infancy anymore, how do you think of your own restaurant? And do you think that it can stay exactly the same? Does it need to change? And how do you change it for the future? Does it need to?
Well, it's always evolving. I always wanted a restaurant, well, Melanie, my partner and I, we always wanted a restaurant where our friends could feel comfortable. We want a place where everyone can afford, well, not afford, but, there's a sense that it's accessible. You could have a bowl of soup and a glass of wine, or you can go crazy and spend more money on more expensive wine. So we're trying to make it a place for everyone. Yeah, it's always evolving. Every head chef that we've had has brought so much to the place of their own personalities, their own food. At the moment, the head chef is Hector, my son actually, and he's bringing a lot of his ideas and influences, which come from St. John and all these places. Also, we're influenced by who we're buying. So now we're buying vegetables from places like Linley Farm, because vegetables were quite a tricky thing to buy. Good vegetables in London for a long time, and now that's changing. We're sourcing meat directly from farmers, so we're missing out the middle person. So in that way, it's all changing. I think the Instagram has changed it. We have thoughts that maybe we will plan. We're constantly we'd like to do another cookbook. We want to keep vibrant. We want to keep changing. I'm still ambitious, and as I just turned 60, I'm definitely not retiring and I want to keep going for a long time.
That was Margot Henderson. Soho Food Feast is happening this weekend in London. You can find out more at sohofoodfeast.co.uk. You're listening to The Menu. Until recently, most people had low expectations of wine that comes in a can. But Jordan Salsito is one of the people shifting that perception. Salsito is the founder and CEO of Ramona, a canned wine spritz. Having worked as a sommelier for the 3 Michelin-starred 11 Madison in New York and as beverage director of the Momofuku Group, she knows a good drink when she tastes one. Monocle's Liv Kessler spoke with Salsito about what's changed in the beverage industry since she founded Ramona in 2016, what she's achieved with her product, and what the future holds in store.
How did you get your start in the wine industry? What was it, like early on? Why were you drawn to it?
I always enjoyed working in restaurants. It was always something that I did sort of after my real job, quote unquote, in high school and then through college, and something that was always social, but also my favorite part of restaurants in so many ways was learning about wines, tasting wines, getting to connect with people through wines. And then once I moved to New York, so I moved to New York City after college, and initially I moved there to write. I thought, okay, I'm going to write and I want to work in publishing, but I moved during a recession where magazines were not hiring. And so I still had to pay rent and ended up just walking around to a bunch of restaurants and dropped off my resume at a few of them and got a job at one that was called Topo, the Italian word for cork. And the thing that I liked most about that place was that the owners really loved wine and they started organizing these wine tastings. In fact, then I was put in charge of organizing these wine tastings on Thursday afternoons. And it was a really non-technical introduction to the world of wine. They were in this very tumultuous relationship, and effectively the way in which they spoke about wine was a reflection of their relationship on any given day. So on some days, the wines were generous and sensual and open. And on other days, they would talk about wine as like, this wine is angry and closed. And you could just see that it was very much a reflection of whatever their relationship with each other was on a given day. But that was the first experience I had tasting and drinking wines that were really good and from Europe, and not to stereotype. I mean, I don't want anyone coming at me with a pitchfork, but my restaurant experience up until then had been in American restaurants, and we worked with primarily American wine, big, juicy Napa Valley Cabernets, and wines that were sort of just not really my style. And then once I was introduced to these European wines, it was a new world. I mean, literally and it was an old world. It was the old world of winemaking. And that was so delicious. And it was such a different experience. And then through the New York restaurant world, after this restaurant called Topo, I ended up working at a place called WD-50, which is where I met a guy that I'm now married to. So Robert used to come into the restaurant where I worked at the time called WD50, and he had this restaurant that had a really special wine collection. He would invite me on dates, and I was sort of trying to figure out, who I was at the time. And I was sort of like, no, I'm busy. And then he was like, he was thoughtful and persistent enough. And I remember going to visit the restaurant, which was called Washington Park. And then it evolved and became a restaurant called Crew, which was famous for having these extraordinary Burgundies. And that was my first exposure to really great Burgundy. And for me, that was like this aha moment on so many different levels. And I guess at the time, yes, then Robert and I were beginning to date, but also fast forward, I was working at Daniel Boulud's restaurant, his flagship restaurant, Danielle, on East 65th Street in New York. And I was working in the kitchen.
You go from these gradually up the ranks into these really exciting, but quite traditional in some ways, restaurants to where you are now. And I think I'm really interested in knowing kind of not only about all your sommeliering and everything you're doing, but also how you gradually transition away from the fine wine industry and that kind of roles that you have there to the canned wine, being a CEO of your own company. Canned wine wasn't such a thing, especially in the era that you're talking about.
No, for sure. And I think for me, I had the idea for Ramona in 2015. And at that point, I had worked over 10 different harvests in various wine regions, primarily Burgundy. So that was sort of my aha moment with production, was getting to work harvest in Burgundy in 2006. And I just was able to just do that for 10 years at different places, largely in Burgundy, but also in Patagonia, in California, and Italy. And I think for a long time, I wanted to just learn as much as I could, because it was sort of like, this world is so fascinating, and the decision making and the sort of the art of wine was always really interesting and really inspiring to me. And so getting to see that up close, and then writing wine lists on the other side in the restaurant space, while also I think I just wanted to sort of learn as much as possible. And so I was also going through this Court of Master Sommeliers exam and taking these wine exams and passing them and studying for new ones and all of that. And the thing that inspired Ramona was a sort of moment of self-awareness of like, okay, fine wine is something that I love, that I am so inspired by. But there are also these moments where it's not a fine wine moment. And like, I'll think of like, moments where it's a lunch on a Saturday, and it really at the beginning of when I had the idea for Ramona, there were not these hard seltzers or these other things which are all malt based. And at the end of the day, it's still sort of the same thing, and that's why I think Ramona has had the staying power that it has, because the inspiration was always, okay, let's look at the fine wine world. And for me, that value system was what was so interesting and so inspiring. This idea of excellence, and this idea of excellence, whether it was in the kitchen or whether it was in a winery or whether it was in a canned wine, this idea of excellence, but sort of contextual. And in the United States, there was a real gap. And I can't speak to other markets in the same way, but there was a real gap in beverages for casual moments and the value system that came along with that. And I just felt like I couldn't possibly be the only person that didn't want to not have to drink something that was clearly made with like some big corporation's bottom line in mind as like the only lens through which the beverage was created. And so, yes, for me, like taste was always important. Like if I'm going to drink something, I want it to be delicious. By that point, I had had a lot of great wines, and sometimes it's a fine wine moment, but sometimes it isn't. And so sort of like, why isn't there something that's organic, that tastes good, that isn't poisoning people or the planet? And I just felt like if nobody else was going to do that, I was in a position where I could give it a try.
How initially, when you first started out, so you were saying you were quite early on in the game, how did people feel about canned wine then? Because I'd be really interested to know your take on this, because there's a lot more canned wine now than there was in 2016 when you actually launched the brand. And so how did people feel about canned wine when it was first released, and how does that compare to how people feel about canned wine now?
It's such a good question. I think certainly people are a lot more open-minded towards it now. And then the thing about Ramona, so Ramona is named after my little sister's childhood alter ego. When she was little, she would do these ridiculously naughty things and then blame it on her 5-year-old alter ego, Ramona. And then that always just stuck with me. I was like annoyed by it when she was 4 and I was 10, like around that sort of era of her childhood and mine. But it always stuck with me as this sort of like representation of high integrity, high quality mischievousness. And that's sort of where the name came from, and still how I think about Ramona. So Ramona is not meant to be, I guess for me, I didn't want it to be a wine for the sake of being a wine. It was more like, okay, this is a vessel. We do have one wine, a sparkling rosé, but it's also a spritz. Like we mix it with fruit. We mix it with organic Sicilian citrus fruit, which seems a little bit, I don't know. It's like, in some ways it's like, well, that's just a crazy thing to do. And then in the other hand, it's like, well, that's also like how the Romans drank their wine for, and that'll has like a very deep history. But I wanted Ramona to have that value system without pretending that we were trying to do the same thing as these amazing wineries where I was able to work and get an education.
Jordan Salsito from Ramona Wines talking to Monocle's Liv Kessler. This is The Menu. Time now for the week's food and drink headlines. Here's Monocle's George Ruskin.
Spain has reaffirmed its status as the global leader of fine dining, with 6 of its eateries making the world's 50 best restaurants list for 2024, including 3 in the top 5. At the ceremony in Las Vegas, known as the Oscars of Fine Dining, Barcelona's Disfruta was awarded the top spot, followed by Asador Etabari in Bilbao, whilst Madrid's Diverso came 4th in this year's ranking. The UK's largest supermarket chain, Tesco, is trialling the use of laser-etched product information and barcodes on its avocados. The sustainability initiative aims to reduce plastic waste and, if successful, could save up to 20 million plastic labels and trays entering landfill every year. The trial is part of the grocery giant's ongoing goal of achieving net zero carbon emissions by 2050. A chain of Irish burger bars called Supermax has won a David and Goliath legal case against McDonald's. The European Court of Justice found in Supermac's favour, revoking the American fast food giant's exclusive use of the Big Mac trademark in the EU. The ruling ends a 9-year legal battle and opens the door for Supermax to expand outside of Ireland for the first time. I'm George Ruskin, and those are the menu headlines on Monocle Radio.
Thanks, George. This is The Menu. Finally, on today's show, when you think of olive oil, 2 countries probably spring to mind, Italy and Greece. But the 2 nations take very different approaches to their olive oil traditions. Italy has a national organisation that runs olive oil tastings and production seminars and sets standards for the country's industry. Greece takes a more decentralised approach, leaving its olive oil production in the hands of family-run businesses. But one man is trying to set new standards for Greek olive oil. Vasilis Frantsolas has been running olive oil production seminars for 2 decades and more recently has introduced his own tasting classes as well. Frantsolas spoke to Monocle's Chris Chermak at the recent Delphi Economic Forum. He began by describing why he set up these olive oil seminars in the first place.
As I say always, high quality olive oil, not how to make olive oil. How to make olive oil is very easy, to make just olive oil, but how to make high quality. This is how we set up all these seminars these years. I do this job for more than 20 years, and thousands of people have passed, from our classes, oliveoilseminars.com. And in Greece, we don't have basic education to how to make high quality. So I found this gap very interesting to fill it up, and that's why I'm doing these things. And I continued further the education, let's say, or training of the people by training people on olive oil tasting, okay, in collaboration with the Italian Association of Olive Oil Tasters. And now for 7-8 years, we train every year one class, which is 35 to 38 people, in a series of seminars that take long as 65 hours every year, 3.5 months. And we are happy because now people start really understand. For these people, the most important is not the quality in general terms. We emphasize and we focus on the defects of olive oil. Why? Because if, for example, you have a wine and it has a small defect, it doesn't change category. Okay. In the olive oil, it's totally different. If you find a small defect, then the olive oil is downgraded from extra virgin to simple virgin olive oil, which is different category, different values, different labels. Okay, so it's very critical to be able to understand as a producer or as a person in the business if an olive oil has a defect or not. So that's why in these seminars we emphasize, we focus more on the defects. And we are happy, with what we're doing, with the results we have so far.
You mentioned there that part of the reason you are doing this is because it had not really been done before. Both the production side of your seminars and then the tasting side. Why is that, do you think? Greece has such a history of olive oil, like Italy and others, but has it been more about sort of family traditions passed down rather than sort of professionalizing how you go about this? Is that where it comes from, or why has there not been more training on this front?
Yeah. Now we need training because before the last 20 years or 25 or 30 years, quality was not an issue on olive oil. The only thing we were looking for was acidity. I said, okay, in Greece we know what is the acidity of this olive oil. My father, who was an olive oil merchant, my grandfather was an olive oil merchant, they were always looking at the acidity. Okay. Oh, this is very good, no, this is bad. Okay, things have changed now. We go to the production of a product that has now incorporated, I would say, state-of-the-art technology. We emphasize on the aromas. Acidity now, it's in the past. We never talk about acidity. Of course, acidity should be low. But now we emphasize on the aromas of olive oil and also on the phenols. And when an olive oil doesn't have a phenol, I used to say, this is a dead olive oil. Okay, it's neutral in the mouth, you don't feel any bitterness or pungency. So we must enhance these characteristics by technology, not only in the olive oil mill, but also before, because you have to select the proper period when to collect olives, at which stage of maturity, depending on what you want to get in this oil, to have more pungency, less, because if it's a commercial olive oil, you don't want the olive oil to be very pungent because people don't like that. But if it's a high quality, the high-end olive oil, now we want these characteristics, fruitness and pungency and bitterness to be at a high level. We want to be higher than the aromas. The aromas should always prevail. So anyway, I think now that in Greece, if you want to tell you my opinion, how do you see the olive oil industry, how it's going? I said quality-wise, okay, quality-wise. I say, okay, the last 10 years, it was a big step that was made, and olive oil went up to a certain level. Now we have many good olive oils, but we don't have any olive oils in the higher quality, which is the prime olive oils. In this case, how you can go there? Only with technology and good training of the people.
The people that you train, the tasters, what is their approach when they come into these trainings, and what is their approach once they leave? What are you looking for in them? What makes a good taster? What makes a good palate for tasting olive oil?
Okay. I see every year when you give the certifications that you completed the course, I see their faces. It's unbelievable. It's like they discovered a new world, believe me. They are so happy because when they came, they had no idea about quality. I mean, how you judge, and now they They think because we taste many olive oils in order to achieve up to a level more than 180 samples in that period, sometimes 200 samples, many samples. But not just taste, we give in-depth explanation why you have this defect, where it's coming from, why it's important, because you can go back and correct the mistake you made to have that. So it's a little complicated. It means you need very experienced people to do the teaching. That's why you cooperate also with the Italians, but we have one or two very good Greek teachers. And I think that people are very happy. But what you have learned in tasting of olive oil, you lose it after 1 or 2 years because you need memory about that. So what we do, and we are the only in Greece who do that, we have the program of continuing education of olive oil, or tasters of olive oil. And we send to people every month 6 samples, and they taste them, and we have a platform, and people go and put their own judgment, and then they open and they see immediately what's going wrong, and they can send us an email and all these things. So we have people now for 6 years, they follow this program, the continuing education, because they know that if they leave it, they're going to forget pretty soon with our standards. And actually we follow the standards of the Italian government because they have some specific laws.
Which goes to the question, I suppose, that we were discussing earlier, but do you find that Italy has been so much more advanced on this? Is this something that Greece, you feel, needs to catch up on and also have its own standard, in that sense, national standard for this kind of thing? It's interesting that you have to use the Italian standard instead of having a Greek standard.
We're behind, we're very behind. Italians are, they're working on that for more than 30, 40 years on the high quality olive oils. Then we have the Spanish olive oils that have followed. In the last, I would say, 15 years, the Spanish olive oils have made tremendous big steps on quality, and now they compete on international level on the high-end olive oil.
So what is your vision then for Greek olive oil? Are you hopeful that it can reach that high quality, the Italian standards? What is your hope?
No, cannot be because Italians, they have a very good education on olive oil. They offer, they have institutes, they have universities that work on that. So in Greece, we don't have this capacity. I think education is the key. So this is the problem, I think, for Greece. We need to emphasize on training and education on olive oil.
Tell me about the importance for Greece then of olive oil, why it is so important that it is able to raise its quality. This is actually quite a challenging time for the olive oil market. Prices going through the roof, all of that. So what are the challenges for you and why does it matter?
I know the answer. Okay. If you want to make not to make money, to be on a positive part of the white tape, you have to add value. And you can add value only if you standardize, if you bottle the olive oil. The Greeks make very good olive oil. They make, but the Italians buy it. The best Greek olive oil. But Greeks, if they don't penetrate the markets with olive oil, but not in bulk, but standardized, is that correct word? Or okay. They cannot get the added value. You need added value to survive, to cover your expenses plus a small profit or whatever. But it's not easy to penetrate the market now because you have competitors coming from all over the sides of the world. Turkey is going up very, very quickly and very high. Now we have Morocco, we have Tunisia. Portugal, okay, it exports in Brazil, but it doesn't have any serious products sold in Europe. But you cannot compete Italians and Spanish if you don't put higher quality, because only if you sell olive oil in higher quality, you can get more money out of it. So in Greece, we have to enhance, the whole system, to have more people trained. I'm happy I'm doing this type of work for these years, but I can see the results clearly. When they have competitions, sometimes we had 50% of the awards coming from people that have passed from our seminars. So I'm very happy, but on the other hand, it's not enough. We have very good quality, it's not marketed enough. We will see in the next years.
That was Vasilis Frantsolas speaking to Monocle's Chris Chermak.
And that's all for this week's edition of The Menu. I'm Chiara Rimella. This programme was produced by Henry Rees Sheridan. Our sound engineers were Mariella Bevan and Tamsin Howard. We'll be back next Friday, but make sure to catch our sister show Food Neighbourhoods, which is out on Tuesday. Thanks for listening, and until next week.